Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our ACSA Legislative Action Day Advocacy Preview. I'm Naj Alikhan, also joined by Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. For the next couple of minutes, we'll talk about ACSA's legislative priorities as you get ready to advocate on Legislative Action Day and also in your community on behalf of education leaders and most important students. Edgar, good to have you with us today. This is very unique. Like so many things over the last year, we are trying something different, and we aren't missing the boat here. This is the first time we're trying giving the legislative priorities in this type of format.
Hey, Naj, yeah, I'm excited. Like as we were talking, this is like so many things in the last year. We're trying it for the first time. Hopefully we do it well. I think the spirit of what we're trying to do today is, like you said, it's so often, and I always think of this image, and I so miss our, the Sheraton and the Capitol just filled with our administrators and just having Sacramento really just with ACSA members all over it. So I very much miss that, right? One of the images that I always remember every year is that our members, I always joke, they're such good students. We have them there in the ballroom, prepping them for our leg advocacy topics, and they're literally trying to write down every single word. Yeah. Where we're trying to say, right? They're trying to get down every detail. So we thought, since we have the advantages of technology now, maybe let's try to do this a little bit different. Let's put some of this down virtually. We're going to get it to our folks with some advance notice. Everybody will get a chance to review it, maybe a couple times. Hopefully they don't catch all our mistakes we may or may not make. But the idea that folks will have a chance to really think about these advocacy priorities even before they virtually step into their advocacy visits on the day of Ledge Action Day. With all that said, we're still going to dedicate some time the day of to answer questions in real time, live. So I'm excited about doing this.
It's no PowerPoint this year, no big folder with all of the legislative priorities and bullet points. This is certainly going to be a unique and hopefully something that our members truly like. And Edgar, before we start talking about the legislative priorities, I do want to kind of connect the dots here, because we've always talked about the influence that our members can have inside the Capitol with Ledge Action Day. This year, we don't have that virtual environment. However, we've talked many times about the importance of that seat at the table for ACSA, and perhaps like no other year, perhaps like no other 6 months, ACSA's advocacy inside the state capitol with the lawmakers, with the decision makers, has really had a strong impact over what's happening in public education.
You hit it on the head, Naj. I mean, in some ways, our job is made somewhat a little bit easier this year, maybe a little bit harder, because what our ACSA members have already accomplished as we're entering April here. Usually we're just ramping up and we're talking about what's going to be in the budget, may revise, and where we have to push. The amount of policies that have already got changed because of our members' advocacy, all of the changes around SB 86 and the legislation to prioritize in-person instruction. If you think about the changes to the physical distancing requirements, changing it from 6 to 3 feet, all of that is a result of our members pushing really hard, telling their stories, everything we say every year. So in some ways, this year we had to get creative in terms of what else do we need? Yes, we have a lot of momentum. I think we're entering a period where the majority of schools, I think I would argue, are now moving into in-person instruction. So we really asked ourselves the question, given that we are in a relatively good place, what are the things, what are the decisions that the policymakers really need to make to really prepare our folks, not only for the rest of this academic year, but really start looking into the next school year?
And we're going to cover 3 issue areas today, Edgar. And before we bring in members of the ACSA Governmental Relations team to talk a little bit more in depth on these 3 issues, we're going to talk about the return to in-person instruction, the use of local assessments, and fiscal challenges. Of those 3, Edgar, it's difficult to predict which one is most impactful today compared to which one is going to be most impactful 2 weeks from now, because things are so fluid. But just as we begin to bring in members of your staff, can you just give us kind of an overview of those 3 issue areas?
Yeah. The reason we kind of landed on these three, as you talked about, this whole issue, nothing's more important right now than still supporting our schools as they're making this transition to in-person instruction. You see, we're very careful with our words, and we know our members are going to be very careful with their words as we go into our advocacy visits. It's not about reopening schools. We all now understand. We're all very versed in the notion that schools have been open really since day one, with the exception of those weeks that we struggled at the beginning of the pandemic. Schools have been open. Yes, has it looked different? Of course it's looked different, but schools have been open. Now, the idea here is we need to tell the policymakers what is the things that they need to know as they start preparing to make decisions that are going to impact the next academic year. You'll hear from Yvonne and from our team what are some of those pieces, but this is one of the huge pushes there on really making sure that they understand time is of the essence, and we also need them to be cautious about doing anything that may impact that momentum. The second issue is this local assessments. Aside from the CDPH guidelines and physical distancing and all the pieces that are impacting directly because of COVID, this is also COVID related. The issue we get asked most about is testing, right? Assessments, spring assessments, the CAS. You'll hear from Diana in terms of why it's important, even though there we've also made some progress, and this also is changing by the day, and things are looking good on this front. But we also need the legislature to take some action on this. So that's why that issue is important. And then finally, in a year where we have to acknowledge that fiscally, the state has offered support, through Prop 98, through some of these incentive dollars, this other pots of money that's going to aid summer learning or even supports into next year. The federal government, under the leadership of the new administration, has also dedicated a lot of funds to schools. So yes, we're happy that we are getting the fiscal support. We also need to take the opportunity to educate our legislators that there's still struggles ahead of time, right? Most of these dollars, all of them, are one-time dollars. And so for all of the good, positive fiscal news we have today, we do have to draw a little bit caution to our policymakers, not to say, yes, good news, but there's still work to be done. And that's kind of our objective on putting that fiscal issue on the agenda as well.
Well, you mentioned Yvonne, so let's go ahead and bring a new face onto our show today. Yvonne Carrillo is a legislative advocate for ACSA's Governmental Relations Department. We're going to tackle that issue of the return to in-person instruction with Yvonne. Yvonne, let's talk about what we want our members to be advocating for in terms of this full in-person instruction.
Yeah, well, a big focus of it is educational, making sure that the members of the legislature are well aware of what you are currently doing in your school districts, what you plan to do for the summer and fall as well. Because we know that there are definitely some gaps in terms of members' knowledge of what's taking place within their districts, and it's really critical. As we've been hearing conversations within the Capitol, there have been some that have been on record saying that they don't think distance learning or a hybrid option should even be available to LEAs come the next school year. But we know that there are going to be a significant number of parents who are going to continue to want their students to be served through a distance learning option or and continue to be served virtually. And that without that option, that many parents are going to leave the public school system. And so as you're preparing for the summer and the fall, we want you to tell your stories. And I know we've emphasized that now for years now, the importance of telling your stories, but that's exactly what we want you to do. What's your delivery method that you are planning for the summer and fall? What type of academic supports that are above and beyond what you provide in the normal year are you planning to accelerate learning? What type of programs and supports are you offering related to social, emotional well-being and mental health? Again, that's above and beyond the norm. We want you to tell these things up to the legislators so they know all the good work that's taking place, but so they recognize as well the continued challenges and gaps that need to be filled through policy. And one really critical thing that we want to make sure that you all emphasize for the policymakers as well is the importance of them giving clarity and making decisions quickly. That as you plan for the coming school year, that you need them to make decisions on delivery methods that are going to be made available to you. What are going to be the requirements for hybrid learning that you all need to be aware of to be able to plan for the summer and the fall. And we know that some LEAs are going back to school as early as July, and that you need clarity on this as quickly as possible. So that's one really important piece that we want you to be able to share with your legislators is the key piece of them making decisions as expeditiously as possible.
One thing that Yvonne said, and I think is one of the first words out of his mouth, and I think it's the most important piece, is this is an educational exercise. This is about trying to get our members to give the policymakers the lay of the land. You will notice, and Naj made note of this year, you don't have multi-paper white papers. You see our leave behind that you'll see it's a one pager, it's a couple paragraphs, and there's one reason for that. You don't need the expertise. You folks have the expertise. What's important about this exercise is telling, and we're a broken record here, but it's telling your story. It's having you translate what's happening in the ground and giving these policymakers a little bit better perspective and drawing a little bit of caution to the wind to make sure that any of the decisions that they make don't upset those plans that are already underway. So that's one of the reasons that we're being very succinct in terms of what we're asking for. And I joke, that there's years where they have to write down everything we say. This is not one of them because you guys already know it. It's you folks are the experts on this issue.
Hey, Yvonne, you mentioned the storytelling, just like Edgar did. We've heard from a lot of our members who have said with the in-person instruction that they've been able to do, whether it's, full or limited, that the response has been very positive, and that the more evidence out there that there is that our schools, our school districts, our education leaders are creating this safe, substantive environment for the students for in-person learning, that more students are coming back. Just through your lens, do you think that's an important story to be telling, is that more families are becoming more comfortable with sending their kids back as we're strengthening this in-person education?
Oh, without a doubt. I appreciate you asking that, because that piece is so critical. I think so often it's easy to get in front of legislators and policymakers and them hear everything that maybe is going wrong. But there's so much that's going right, as you just stated, Naj, and we hear these stories weekly from our members, all the successes in terms of returning an increased number of students to on campus, ensuring safety, and making sure that their entire needs are being met, especially on the mental health and social emotional side. So we need to make sure that these stories are definitely heard by legislators, because they don't hear these things, and we hear these conversations sometimes, just how disgruntled some legislators are and their frustrations by what they think is taking place or not taking place. And it's so clear to us who are connected to the field so closely that there is a disconnect in terms of the way they view things and what's actually taking place on school campuses throughout the state. So definitely emphasizing and telling the stories of all the great work that's taking place and that will continue to take place is really important for the members to hear.
All right, Yvonne, sit tight. We'll come back to you in just a couple of minutes to talk about another issue area, but let's go ahead and transition over to the use of local assessments. Diana Vu is also a member of ACSA's Governmental Relations Department, a legislative advocate. Diana, let's go ahead and let's talk overview here of what the situation is with assessments and what is our ask this year as we move in towards Ledge Action Day.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Naj. So California recently received really great news from the U.S. Department of Education that they can proceed with using local assessments. And this can be any local assessments as long as it meets all the following requirements as laid out by the State Board of Education. This includes aligning with the Common Core standards, available to assess students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, uniformly administered across a grade span, school, or district, and provides disaggregated results to parents, educators, and the public. We are also waiting on approval from ED for for several other flexibilities that have been submitted by the state. This includes decoupling the state assessment from the federal accountability requirements, waiving penalties for participation rates less than 95%, extending the administration window to July 30th, and waiving the administration of all this California science tests altogether. We expect this all to be approved, though, and fairly soon, hopefully. CD is also planning for a modified 2021 dashboard, considering that standardized tests will not be administered across the board. The data that they are considering, though, is the inclusion of some of the current dashboard elements. This includes enrollment data, chronic absenteeism, and suspension rates, in addition to new elements such as reclassification rates, AP results, and expulsion rates. CD and SBE are going to continue working with the state legislature and the governor's administration to temporarily align the education code with this school year's assessment flexibilities. This, however, does not change the LEA's ability to continue utilizing local assessments. ACSA, along with many other education organizations, are also advocating the state legislature and administration on this issue. And we would ask that our members, when they meet with their representative, also provide to request the state action to immediately further the use of local assessments for this school year and provide stories, because we know that legislators want to hear from their constituents. So something that I think would be really beneficial is telling legislators how students are already struggling. We know that that mental health issues are on the rise. The digital divide is not over. And right now there are fewer education, like in-person instruction days, and that instead of focusing on tests, we should be focusing on accelerating learning. The CASP is also not an accurate or comparable or reliable data form right now, too. Legislators want to hear that, and why local assessments are a better tool to understanding student progress. And local assessments also provide actionable data for parents and educators. So hopefully that helps our members advocate a little bit.
Diana hit it on the head in terms of that storytelling. And again, I know sometimes we're a broken record on this, but especially this year, it's so important in terms of talking about what the plans are. Again, we already made a lot of progress on this issue because our members had been telling those stories to the state board, to CDE, talking about the challenges that just doing business as usual with state assessments, how difficult that would be. Now, we could expect there might be some folks who are concerned about, well, how are we going to know students are doing if we're not actually assessing them, with the CASP or with these tests? And I think this, again, as Diana was pointing out, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to tell our story, not only why going about it how we usually do in terms of spring assessments doesn't make sense this year, but what are LEAs doing, or what are they going to plan to do given the flexibility on that. So we're this one, again, things have been changing. Hopefully they don't change too much since from the time we're recording this to when we're going to advocate. But I think we're getting close to getting across the finish line to give our folks the flexibility they need. I think convincing these policymakers, these legislators, is one of the final hurdles.
Well, so that brings me to this question, Diana. Where do we see the pushback coming up here on assessments? Where are we going to meet some challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question, Naj. So we believe it will be from the legislature. We don't know how much, but it's, as Edgar pointed out, it's really understanding, making sure that legislators understand that local assessments can provide that reliable data source on student progress to be able to inform parents and educators, and that the CASP will not, and that students are struggling right now. We know that, we also do know that the legislature will have to provide this action through some sort of bill, whether it's a regular policy bill or trailer bill language. The governor is unlikely to do an executive order on this as he did last year. So the legislature is our big push.
Diana Vu, ACSA legislative advocate from the Governmental Relations Department. Diana, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Naj.
Let's go ahead and bring Yvonne Carrillo back into the show to talk about fiscal challenges. Yvonne, the question I'm about to ask you, I think, is one that we could all understand, but why bring up the fiscal challenges right now, especially when we've had so much assistance and support from the federal and state government?
Well, in short, it's because these one-time investments don't solve the fiscal challenges of LEAs. And LEA's fiscal challenges predate the pandemic, and they will continue well beyond the spending allowance deadlines of these pots of monies that have come through. Not every LEA has benefited to the same degree from these pots of monies that have come out. So much of it is based on Title I funding. There's restrictions on how these dollars can be spent. So when we look at again, just in a little more detail of the experience of LEAs that we know so well from hearing from you all from the field, and the story that we want you to make sure to communicate to members, is that you have pension costs that are rising significantly, that have more than doubled over the last handful of years, and that after this relief buy downs that were put into place by the legislature and governor, that they're gonna spike. That special ed costs, transportation costs, you name it, utilities, all these things that are part of this larger fiscal narrative that you all know so well. Members of the legislature and staff don't know that story well. What's fresh on their minds is that school districts have gotten billions and billions and billions of dollars in state and federal aid, and that there's no the fiscal challenges that remain for districts, and that there's no room for schools to complain of any fiscal challenges whatsoever. But as they are making these budgetary decisions, as they're reviewing policies that have great fiscal tags to them, and will put more fiscal burdens on school districts, we want to make sure that these stories are fresh on their mind, so they're utilizing that informed place, a position for making decisions on the policies that come before them.
Yeah, Naj, I think we're walking a fine line, and admittedly so, right? Because we do want to acknowledge, and I think that's part of our advice here, acknowledge that we appreciate the resources that have been dedicated to schools, that they've helped, especially tackling the immense challenges that the pandemic has brought on. With that said, transitioning that thank you to say, hey, but let's not forget, schools were in a challenging fiscal place before the pandemic. And there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to our schools and long-term future, not just fiscally, but on a number of these issues we continue to tackle. So I think it is important to very carefully, transition that appreciation to, again, educating the policymakers of what are the challenges that are facing schools right now, and not just at the moment, but long term. And I think that's why we usually lead off talking about money. You could tell this is the third issue we're talking about, but we still thought it was very important to give this reality check to our policymakers about what our schools are facing.
Yvonne Carrillo, ACSA legislative advocate from the Governmental Relations Department. Yvonne, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, Edgar, so we've tackled three issues: return to in-person instruction, the assessments, and fiscal challenges. As we get ready to move into just discussing what's going to happen on Ledge Action Day, can you just summarize again why those three issues are so important and so impactful as our members get ready for Ledge Action Day?
Yeah, before I jump in there, because I will probably forget, I just want to give a quick shout out to members of our team. Obviously, you saw Yvonne and Diana here today. There's a number of members that have been working really hard behind the scenes to get all this ready. Suzanne, Christy, Jason, Laura Preston, our other advocate who's not on today but has helped. So this has really been a team effort. But the biggest thank you here is our members, because we don't make this stuff up. This has been weeks and months of listening to our folks in terms of what is they think the biggest issues that we need to really put before the policymakers. And with that said, I think that's to your point of your question, Naj. This is why we're going in this direction, because it's listening to our members. And again, not to beat a dead horse here, but the reason that we are kind of succinct in terms of the issues, if these are folks that no matter whether you're a superintendent or you're a site administrator or you're anywhere in the ACSA landscape in terms of all of the positions we represent, there's a piece here that you can add on to, right? There's a piece here that you can provide some perspective. There's not a lot of A, B, S, B here. There'll be some on the back page, and you don't have to worry so much about talking to those issues. Those are just, we want to remind our legislators that there is opportunity there, to say ACSA has formal positions. But what we really want is, this is an opportunity this year to talk firsthand about opportunities and challenges facing our schools, and what is the legislator's role in that, but really helping them, reminding them that before they make big decisions, to keep in perspective the thoughts and the perspectives of our folks who actually have to implement this. And I think we've been successful this year on a number of fronts, but it's kind of why we landed on these 3 issues.
And I'll have you preview Ledge Action Day, because, we've talked about how things are so different this year in compared to years past, even just doing a video like this. One thing that we have seen over the years have been lawmakers maybe coming in and giving a keynote, or a lot of legislative staff meeting face-to-face with members. But this year, in this virtual environment, is different, because much like you and I have with the Ledge Lunch Break on Wednesday, this is that opportunity to have some real substantive interaction with these lawmakers.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've learned here in our virtual environment is that the kind of the Q&A aspect seems to work well. Having our folks blow up the chat, and you and I trying to decipher which questions we're going to take is always a challenge. But I think it gives also the members a perspective. Even what they're going to get questions from our members. But as they're talking about, we always ask, always be respectful, but be frank, right? In terms of things that they're saying, feel free to react to. So often when we have these guests, whether it be on legislative lunch break or in other meetings we have at ACSA, we have the members and staff asking us, can we get a copy of that chat? Because they're getting instant reaction in terms of the things that they're considering. How is that going to impact them? Obviously, we're going to ask about questions. What is their perspective? What do they think is going to happen on distance learning? Do we see the parameters around that changing? So I think it's going to be, as much as us getting our perspectives to them, it's going to be really interesting to hear where they're at right now, right? As we're weeks away from some really important decisions. We got all the key members, the chairs of each of the respective education committees, the chairs of the education budget subcommittees. I mean, this is where the stuff happens, right? So I think it'll be an awesome opportunity to really influence the process at a very important time as well.
Yeah, the lawmakers are looking forward to hearing the stories we've heard so much about, telling stories. Looking forward to that. That is April 12th and 13th. It's Edgar and I for 2 half days. It's our Ledge Lunch Break on steroids. So again, April 12th and 13th, you can go ahead and register ACSA.org. Edgar, good seeing you. We've got a really, really great Ledge Action Day coming up. I'm very excited about that, folks. We'll see you April 12th and 13th for the 2021 Legislative Action Day.